they do not have a running back. If you look at what Ezekiel Elliott's tape has shown the last 2 years, he's certainly not a back that can carry 230 or 240 times. And Dak, because of the style of quarterback that he is at this point, as I said, a distributor, he needs a complete offense. He needs a run game to be effective.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It never is, but especially not on a Teaching Tutorial Thursday. That means my favorite guest, the venerable Greg Cosell, NFL film superstar, is in the house. We're actually wrapping up our series on these divisional previews. We might have saved the best for last in terms of the NFC East today. Plus, there's actually several guys in the news the last couple of days I need to get Greg's thoughts on. Jelani Tavai got an extension. Tashaun Gibson got suspended. Oli Gordon might be the best running back in next year's draft. Got a DUI. That's not real good. We'll get into all that stuff with Greg momentarily. And those are the main items for later. You guys know the deal. No more fresh episodes for the rest of the holiday weekend. However, Even Money was awesome with Steve Fezzik this week. Fantasy Feast, finding out what Joe Dolan has done in his best ball draft so far was fascinating. College Draft with Emory is always enlightening. You can follow me on social media. I appreciate those of you who do, at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. And even though I announced the entries for the first best ball draft against me and Joe, DraftKings best ball draft, I'm already taking entries for the next best ball draft. So take advantage of any of our sponsors or just rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Send it to me, Ross at RossTucker.com, so I can go against you in a best ball draft and you can tell everybody I got smoked by Ross Tucker in a best ball draft. That guy knows best ball. Speaking of best ball draft, shout out to Eric, our latest patron. Patreon.com/RT Media. No last name for Eric, but we'll take it. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
Okay, Greg, before we get to the NFC East, actually have a little bit of news over the last couple of days. The Patriots have been very busy extending their own. You know, I think last week it was Ramondre Stevenson. I don't know if I even asked you about that. And then this week, Jelani Tavai. So they have made a decision, Greg, that, yeah, we weren't very good, but we've got some players we really like. We're going to keep them around. Stevenson last week, Tavai this week, Greg. Your thoughts on those two guys?
Well, I think it's evident that they understand that they're going to have to be a running football team on offense. That's going to have to be the starting point, regardless of who their starting quarterback is, Brissett or the rookie Drake May. They're going to have to run the ball. Stevenson is a sustaining type back at his best. And at his best, he's a little more than that as well. But he's certainly a sustaining back who can grind out hard yards and, quote-unquote, keep you on schedule. So that signing made sense. Jelani Tavai, he's probably, because the Patriots were not very good last year, obviously, he's an overlooked player by, I assume, by media. I guarantee not by coaches in the league. He is, in some ways, your classic Belichick player, because Belichick was always kind of a believer, if I were to give the Cliff Notes version, in front multiplicity and coverage consistency. They play a lot of man, a lot of single high under Belichick. Tavai is your classic front multiple player, can line up at multiple linebacker positions, can line up on the ball, on the edge, can step inside and line up in a stand-up position on the ball. A really, really good football player, just doesn't get a lot of sacks. We tend to think of front seven players in two ways. If they're D linemen, it's sacks. If they're linebackers, a ton of tackles. He probably doesn't fall into any category at the high level. Certainly not when it comes to sacks, but he's just a really solid football player, a building block kind of player.
That's really interesting, Greg. I never heard anybody say that about Belichick that way. Front multiple coverage consistent. but that was my experience both going against him and playing for them.
Yeah, that's what he's been. And Gerard Mayo, again, we don't know exactly what they'll do. New coach, but Mayo certainly has, the Belichick in his background. So I imagine you're not going to see dramatic changes, particularly in the first year.
Other news that came out recently, Greg, Tashaun Gibson, the safety, been around for a while. I think maybe Jacksonville drafted him. Last couple of years, he started a lot of games for the Niners, and actually, I thought he held it down pretty well for them, Greg. He's a free agent, and maybe now we know why. He was just suspended 6 games under the league's performance-enhancing drug policy. It feels like the type of guy that when that suspension's over, somebody will pick up and kind of get a shot in the arm at safety, especially if they've incurred an injury. But what is Gibson as a player?
Well, he was very important for the Niners the last 2 years. And he played very well for them because they're not a high percentage man-to-man defense the last couple of years under 2 different coordinators. We don't know what they'll do this year with a new coordinator. But whenever they went cover 1, meaning there's a single high safety and they match up man-to-man across the board, he was the tight end matchup. So he was critical for what they did when they played man-to-man. And in fact, they're going to have to find a safety who can do that because obviously it's not going to be him. They didn't re-sign him anyway. But he was a really important piece to that 49er defense because they felt very comfortable with him matching up to tight ends man-to-man.
Last guy I wanted to ask you about, I don't even know if you've watched him a lot or a little or how much, but his name is Oli Gordon, and I thought he was arguably the best running back in college football last year. He's got another year of college. I'm assuming he's one of the top prospects. He just got a DUI recently, Greg, and we'll see if that affects him or what happens there. But, man, watching Oklahoma State, that guy, they could run the rock.
Yeah, I've looked at about 90 guys already that are likely to be in next year's draft, including Oli Gordon in detail. He was a high-volume runner, outstanding durability. I thought he was methodical, measured, controlled, had really good patience and vision. I didn't view him as a special runner with high-level traits. For instance, I thought Jonathan Brooks, who was a second-round pick this year to the Carolina Panthers and tore his ACL later in the season last year at Texas, I thought Brooks had better overall running traits than Gordon with a little more juice and shiftiness and overall explosion. But Gordon, I thought, was really patient, had really good vision. He allowed the blocks to develop. He was very good at reading the changing gaps. Because when you're a runner, you kind of have to be able to intuitively read how gaps change. Because as you know, Ross, playing offensive line, where the defense is before the snap of the ball is not how it plays out once the ball is snapped and handed off to a back. So he has to be able to read gap fluidity and defensive flow. And I thought Gordon was very good at that.
Got it. Appreciate it. That's good to know because obviously I just kind of see the highlights or bits and pieces of games here and there. Let's go to Texas, Greg, where Oli Gordon played a bunch of his games, and let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys. Man, I feel like the whole segment could be about the Dallas Cowboys, but as I like to do, just giving you a blank slate as we wrap up our divisional series here on Dallas. What are you most interested in them going into the season?
I think a couple of things. Number one, I think you have to look at their left tackle position because they lost Tyron Smith. They drafted Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma with their first pick. He's only started 14 games in his college career, all at right tackle. I believe right now they plan on making him their left tackle. Now, he has the athletic and physical traits to do that, but he's never done it, and he's only a 14-game starter in college. So that's a big question on offense. If you move along, obviously defensively they're going to be different because Dan Quinn's gone and Mike Zimmer is there, and they're different coordinators. The Cowboys under Dan Quinn were among the league leaders in playing man-to-man coverage. That will not be Mike Zimmer's approach. So we'll see. Defensively, there's going to be meaningful changes, and I think the Cowboys were a heavy, big nickel defense, meaning they played with 3 safeties basically as their base defense. They had the fewest snaps in the NFL playing with 3 linebackers. My guess is that's going to change under Mike Zimmer.
Ooh, that's interesting. Greg, I know I ask you about him all the time, and people ask about it all the time. It's interesting, actually, on the Even Money podcast, Steve Fezzik said that there's been some line movement on the Cowboys season win total because there's rumors that Dak got an MRI, which I thought was interesting. Whether it's true or not, who knows? But it feels like the Cowboys may allow this contract with Dak to play out, Greg, and allow him to be a free agent a year from now. I think he was the runner-up for the MVP of the league last
He
year.
was.
Felt like he played really well.
He did.
There's some people that will tell you he's a top 5 quarterback, Greg, and, every team, most teams would be lucky to have him. There are some Cowboys fans of the belief that, he's not been able to get them over the hump and that maybe they are better off getting somebody else as opposed to paying Dak $60 million a year. What does the tape say about Dak?
I don't think there's a mystery as to what he is. I think at this point in his career, and even though he made a number of second reaction plays a year ago, more so than in the previous couple of years, I think at his core, what he is he's an executor and a ball distributor, and he's good at it. Now, obviously, when you get into the playoffs and play better defenses, depending on who you're playing, you really have to be efficient. One of the issues they have, and they're going to have it this year, is the run game. They do not have a running back. If you look at what Ezekiel Elliott's tape has shown the last 2 years, he's certainly not a back that can carry 230 or 240 times. And Dak, because of the style of quarterback that he is at this point, as I said, a distributor, he needs a complete offense. He needs a run game to be effective. We can look at a lot of the great quarterbacks in the league, and they have run games. Now, people can minimize the importance of a run game, and we all understand that it's not the 1980s, and you don't start everything you do with a run game. It's not like drafting George Rogers #1 in 1980, a running back. Those days are over, obviously, but you still need a run game, and that, to me, is a big question for the Cowboys.
I would absolutely agree with you on that, Greg. What about, as we move it forward, I want to get to the New York Giants, but first, 2 things. One is happy 4th of July, everybody. I know some of you are probably listening or watching youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. But I hope everybody has a very safe, healthy, happy holiday with loved ones. My personal recommendation, if you want to take things to the next level, drink some Labatt Blue Lights with your friends. Live life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Let's talk Giants, Greg. They're in the news because they're doing this Hard Knocks thing, Hard Knocks off season, and there's talk about their skill guys and Saquon. When you think Giants, what do you think, Greg?
Well, obviously, everybody's going to talk about the quarterback, but Daniel Jones. There's talk about Drew Lock competing for the starting job. I think ideally, they would like Jones to be the starter. I think he's a more talented quarterback than Locke overall. There are some things that Jones needs to get better at. One of them is pocket movement, which is a totally different trait than being athletic out of the pocket. Jones is very athletic out of the pocket for a big man, but one of the things he's lacked and has been exacerbated because their O-line has not been very good at all is he is not a pocket mover. He has not shown up to this point, let's say it that way, that's the best way to say it. He's not shown up to this point that he can function really intelligently, athletically, just by moving and avoiding the chaos and distraction of the pocket. And that's a trait he really needs to have. The bigger issue for them, not an issue, it's just a total change, will be defensively. Wink Martindale gone, Shane Bowen in. Shane Bowen does not play anywhere near the amount of man coverage that Wink Martindale does. Shane Bowen is much more of a zone blitz type defensive coordinator, a lot of sim pressure, meaning they're 4-man pressures, but part of the 4-man rush is a linebacker or a DB with D linemen dropping out. So this defense will look totally different than what it did under Wink Martindale.
A lot of interesting things there, Greg. I guess the thing I would say about Daniel Jones, or the question I have, Do you have examples in your experience of guys that got a lot better at pocket movement or navigating the pocket? Because I'm sure there's some examples of guys that have improved, Greg. That feels like
Yeah.
something of an innate thing. And I've played with quarterbacks that had it, and it was incredible as an offensive lineman. And I've played with quarterbacks that didn't have it a lick. And it's extremely frustrating when you're like, just slide there. Just move an inch.
Yeah.
Just don't be a statue. I can't think of many examples. You study it more than I do, Greg, of guys that really improved greatly in that area.
I would tend to agree with you, Ross, 100%. I think it's somewhat of an innate trait, just like pocket toughness is an innate trait. You can't really teach a guy to stand and deliver in the pocket in the face of pressure. They either have that or they don't. So yes, I think that it's unlikely that will dramatically change, and I think it's one reason, despite the fact that Jones actually has pretty good traits. I mean, look, people can say he shouldn't have been the 6th pick in the draft. That's easy to say now. But he's a big kid who throws it well, is athletic, but he just does not have that subtle, nuanced trait of pocket movement, which is so critical for him.
Let's move on to a team that you and I both know well, living in the area. I'll be calling their preseason games in about a month. Hard to believe. It's the Philadelphia Eagles. Lots of changes here, Greg. New OC, new scheme, new DC, similar scheme. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this whole division, quite frankly, has a ton of changes. It's really hard to make a prediction early in July about how this division will play out. I mean, obviously, a brand new scheme on offense. It's going to be so interesting to what they do, because one of the things the Eagles did not do a lot of, which has become so much more prevalent in the league, is the use of motion. And Kellen Moore, their new offensive coordinator, believes in it. The Eagles have not done much of it. And I think you're going to see more and more of it because, as I said, it's become prevalent in the league. It really helps shrink the defensive menu of teams. They can't get to a lot of their calls because of the motion element. So I think you're going to see a different looking offense. The main question for me is Saquon Barkley. Did they sign him to be a true volume back? In other words, do they feel, even with a quarterback like Hurts, who can be a significant part of a run game, obviously, do they feel the offense will run through Saquon Barkley? Are we going to look up at the end of the season, Ross, and see 290 carries for Saquon Barkley? Assuming health, which, by the way, is a big question.
You know, it's interesting because it feels like the last 3 years, the offense has really run through Hurts. I mean, he's kind of been the foundation of the offense. Wouldn't you agree, Greg?
Yeah, although if memory serves me correctly, and obviously the Super Bowl year, Hurts was in the running for MVP and had an outstanding season. No one's questioning that whatsoever. Hurts was truly outstanding. But that season, you know, Miles Sanders had 260 carries, give or take. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I just remember that. And that's a lot of carries. And he averaged almost 5 yards a rush, as I recall. So, yes, Hurts was clearly the foundation. And by the way, his ability to run and how they incorporated the run game elements with the quarterback dictated a lot of how defenses had to align. And that's the critical piece of when your quarterback.
That's my point, is that it was either Hurts running, Hurts throwing, or them acting like Hurts might run as he gives it to Miles Sanders, it felt like.
I mean, there's great examples throughout the season because obviously, you know, I watched their tape really closely, where you could just see the defense had to align a certain way because of the Hurts factor in the run game. And that really allows many other things to happen that are defined for the quarterback. Because ultimately what you're trying to do with a quarterback, Ross, no matter what kind of offense you run, is make it so that he understands what he's getting from the defense before the ball is snapped. That's the ideal.
Okay, last but not least, let's get to the Commanders. More change here, Greg. Head coach Dan Quinn, OC Kingsbury, DC Joe Witt, and they got Jaden Daniels at quarterback.
Yeah, again, another team with brand new staff. you know how I feel about Jaden Daniels. I loved his tape at LSU. I think he'll be a very good NFL quarterback. Whether that means that that'll happen week one, no one can answer that. They've got an interesting group of running backs. They're all kind of grinder sustainers. It'll be interesting to see how Cliff Kingsbury uses that. People need to understand that Kingsbury is not just an air raid guy. He has played in his coaching career in this league to his personnel. I mean, he played a lot with two tight ends at times in Arizona because he simply did not have enough wide receivers that were quality wide receivers. So he is not automatically, air raid, spread it out. That's not the way he's automatically going to play if he believes that their best personnel is running the football and maybe even playing with two tight ends, because right now we're not sure who their third wide receiver would be. They drafted Luke McCaffrey. They've got some other options, but that's a question mark.
It is. And what about them defensively? They do have a lot of guys back on defense.
Yeah, and again, now I'm curious to see what Dan Quinn does. As I said, when he was in Dallas, they played a ton of big nickel with three safeties, and they do have the personnel to do that, by the way, on the Commander. So you could well see him play big nickel. He brought some people in from Dallas, obviously, Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler. Cleveland Farrell is a really good signing, not a pass rusher, but just, we talked about Jelani Tavai earlier earlier in this conversation. Cleveland Farrell, while he's not a linebacker, he's another one of those guys that he's that kind of player. Just a really solid building block kind of player, an under the radar signing. But the corner position is the position that they'll have to really figure out because it's really hard to hide your corners in the NFL.
Check him out on social media. He is the man at Greg Cosell. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Ross.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, as you mentioned with Greg earlier, the Patriots, they signed linebacker Jelani Tavai to a 3-year extension worth up to $21 million, base value of $15 million.
So, two things I love about this. One is, Tavai got drafted by the Lions, and I think at some point got released, went to New England, and so everybody earns the money that they get in the NFL, but he really earned it the hard way, right? I mean, to get released, I think he got released. I have to check on that. But to get released and then end up getting a contract like this, that's life-altering money for his family. You guys know I love that because he earned it the hard way. Plus, I really do like that the Patriots are identifying guys that they think are part of the solution and keeping them. I think that's a smart move by their head of personnel, Elliott Wolf.
Next, we have free agent safety Tashaun Gibson. He was suspended 6 games for violating the NFL's performance-enhancing drug policy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always curious to see what happened here. He's been around for a long time. So for him to have an issue like this, I would think that it was intentional. I mean, he's played so long that that Gibson knows better than to take any type of supplement or any type of pill without checking with the league. I don't think he's ever been suspended again. So this is just pure speculation, but I guess in my mind, if you're testing positive this late in your career, it's probably intentional because you know the rules and it wouldn't be like, oops, I accidentally took a supplement or took this medicine without a therapeutic use exemption.
And the NBA, they set their salary cap at $140 million for next year.
They did. I should mention, by the way, Oli Gordon. Greg and I talked about him a little bit earlier, but DUI. I mean, you think about that, man. He had 10 months, 9 months to just do the right things. And now, he'll have, no matter when he gets drafted now, he'll have to wonder, whether or not that affected it and how much it affected it. Just, especially nowadays, man, with Uber and everything. I don't get it. The NBA salary cap, it's so funny, Jack. I posted this a couple of days ago at Ross Tucker NFL. It's $115 million less than the NFL. And immediately, all these people replied, 40 less players. It's 40 less players, but it's 40 less. No kidding. Thank you. my favorite people ever that reply to a post letting me know that NFL teams have more players on the roster than NBA teams. I know. Guess what? That first of all, that wasn't even the point. Secondly, NBA teams play 82 games. 82 games. The point is that the NFL is generating a lot more revenue for a lot fewer games than the NBA is, which is great. And the salary cap is significantly higher as a result. Other than that, have a terrific holiday weekend, everyone. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. Absolutely think it's the best gift you can get a loved one for any reason. Backofficeschedule.com, humanheadnyc.com, Sportico